Hello, everybody. This is the last unit for your freshman year, or maybe your second time for the last unit of your freshman year. What this is this is imperialism. And imperialism is the idea of bigger, stronger nations taking over weaker nations. And this coincides with what we've been talking about up to this point because the bigger, stronger nations are typically almost always ones that are industrialized, ones that have the factories, they have more money, like the United States at this time. So keep in mind that the United States is industrialized. They do have factories. Those factories need markets to sell their products, and they need raw materials to make those products. So the way to do that is to take over other countries, take their raw materials, use them in your factories, and then produce stuff and then sell it in those countries, areas, territories that you have taken over. Another reason for this is a military presence in locations. So what we're going to talk about is we're just going to kind of go through what it is and then kind of talk about, as a result, what happened from imperialism. So imperialism is the policy which stronger nations extend their economic, political, or military control over weaker territories. So if you look over here, one thing that imperialism causes is a concept that we have talked about before. So if you remember back when we talked about industrialization, what was going on is cities no longer had to create everything on their own, and they became interdependent. They depended on other cities to make things. Well, now what is happening is it's no longer cities within the same country that are depending on each other. It is actually countries within the world that are depending on each other. And that process, that idea is called, some people call it globalism, and it's also called globalization. That, again, is the idea that countries rely on each other. All right, so if you see here this political cartoon on the left, the guy says, what town are we in? There's a Burger King, there's a Gap, so basically what they're trying to say is every town looks the same. And if you were to, get in your car and drive around, a lot of towns look the same. They have the same stores, they have the same, McDonald's is there, Burger King's there, Wendy's is there. It's, there's not too many mom and pop places anymore. And over here on this, it's very similar to that. It says we got these cool hats at Nike Town in Paris and this great shirt at the Disney store in London. After a great dinner at McDonald's in Rome, we found these neat shorts at the Gap. So basically the idea that all these stores are worldwide, and countries rely on each other. What we're going to look at here is, this is a political cartoon. So over here, this is President McKinley. This right here tells you that. This is Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam represents America, and he is basically trying to decide what he's going to have to eat. So you can see it looks like a restaurant, and McKinley is kind of asking the American people, that's who Uncle Sam represents, what do they want? And if you look over here, here's the bill of fare, so that's kind of like the menu. You got a Cuba steak, so do we want to go take over Cuba? You have the Puerto Rico pig, do we want to take over Puerto Rico? The Philippines are right here. And then right down here it says, well, I hardly know which to take first. So the idea is that the United States is going to start taking over these other countries. So we have to kind of think about what led us to doing that, and we're going to look into that in a little bit. These are the three main reasons for imperialism. Desire for military strength is one. We'll definitely go over that. New markets, I've already explained that a little bit. And then there's also the belief in cultural superiority. So we are going to look at these three things. And if you go back into 2003 and back to that modern issues unit we talked about, that would be the third unit that we discussed after it was the unit after the Cold War. We looked at this. It says, you are now leaving Iraq. Thanks for invading and come back soon, imperialist pigs. It says, glad to see they're putting our billions in reconstruction funding to good use. So the idea there was not that we were actually going to help Iraq. It was the fact that we were going there to imperialize and take their oil. And again, that would be new markets. We wanted raw materials. So what led us to imperialism? So here are some of the main things. Well, first off, the first type of imperialism that we had was, we've already discussed it. It was actually the idea that we were going to head west. All right, and again, when we went west, so all the way back into the late 1700s with the Proclamation Line in 1763, if you remember, that was when King George said, hey, don't go west of the Appalachians. Well, we did, and we ended up wanting to head farther west and didn't want to listen to the king. So that's when we got into the Revolutionary War. Remember, then 1763, that was the end of the French and Indian War, when we as Americans, who were technically British at the time, were fighting against the French. So we had always had this idea had the idea of spreading. And what it first was manifest destiny, us heading west, and the land we took was from the Native Americans. So now we're going to do that exact same thing again. All right, so the Western Hemisphere, that's mainly North and South America. Manifest Destiny, that was in the 1830s. If you guys recall, in 1838, we discussed the Trail of Tears and moving Native Americans off their land, and that happened in the mid and late 1800s. If you guys recall the Plains Indians and us taking them off. Then there was industrialization. We talked about the fact that, I've already mentioned the fact that because of industrialization, we needed raw materials and we needed people to sell our stuff to. All right, and then in the late 1800s, it was actually 1886, we have something called the Berlin Conference. And this is when European countries got together and they decided, what are they going to do with Africa? And those European nations started to carve up Africa, and they started doing those things that we wanted to do. All right, so they wanted to get raw materials and then sell their goods. So Africa got cut up in 1884, 1885, my bad. And this is an example of it here. So what you have is you have different countries are represented by these individuals here. And this is a cake of Africa. And he's like, all right, so which piece do you want? And then it says, right here, it says the Berlin Conference regulated European colonization and trade in Africa during the new imperialism period. And basically what you ended up getting was all of these countries. And again, these are your countries that are your stronger nations. Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Italy, Belgium, Spain, and then there was only 2 countries that ended up being independent. So again, these are your biggest, most strongest countries in Europe at the time. All right, so what we're going to continue in the next video is we're going to look at another reason, and that's military strength, and we're going to look at U.S. military bases and continue talking about imperialism.